Hey, everybody, welcome to Mental Health Matters, the podcast that breaks down stigma, makes mental health okay to talk about around the dinner table, the water cooler, or the conference room table if you're at work, because mental health is everywhere. So, as always, right, this is a podcast from St. Louis Counseling. If you're curious about our services, check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. And we have another amazing guest, one of my favorite people in the world, whether she believes it or not. But it's Saundra Barker, our Chief Program Officer, LCSW at St. Louis Counseling. Saundra, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. And you're one of my favorite people, too.
Oh, golly. And see, now look at that. You're a Green Bay Packers fan. I'm a Chicago Bears fan. We can still get along, can't we?
And we can still get along.
Yep, we can agree to disagree that the Packers have probably cheated their way to having two of the best Hall of Fame quarterbacks ever for the last 30 years. And that's just the way it is, right?
Well, we can agree that Bears fans have to make excuses for their lot in life.
Well, it's still pretty rude of you. So it is fun to kind of, as people listening will get to know us a little bit more here. But we like to have a lot of fun as we work because in the line of work that we are in, it is quite challenging and even more challenging, I think. Not that mental health wasn't a thing before COVID, because that's our business, that's our world. We've worked in for our careers, but COVID has really had another level of impact, right? And so, from your experience, working, with our clinicians, and we're in over 120 different schools this school year. We have 7 office locations. We have 80 some therapists at the agency. So we have a pretty good scope, and we're spread out through the region here in St. Louis. So, you get to hear the stories from a lot of different therapists, and they're in a lot of different parts of this region. What are you hearing that the impacts of COVID has brought about with our young people?
Well, so many things, but I guess in a nutshell, one thing I can say is that COVID has just changed the experience of kids. It's changed their experience in school, in their homes, in their communities, in every way. When you think about what it's like for the last 2 years, kids are in school, they're out of school, doing virtual learning, doing hybrid learning, doing in-person learning. We have first and second graders, kindergarten, first and second graders who didn't even experience school for a year. So it's just changed their whole experience, and it's had to. What we're hearing from school people is that some of the um, some of those behaviors are coming out and being really disruptive in school, which is a concern. They have more discipline referrals than they've ever had before. We have grief that abounds everywhere. So I have therapists telling me that in some of the schools that we work in, and even in our office our clinicians, but in schools that they have kids that have lost a grandparent, a parent, an uncle, son. There's been some kind of loss in their family because of COVID. And you compound all of the things with COVID, which has caused increased anxiety. Kids are afraid to come to school. They're afraid of germs. They don't know how to negotiate relationships, depression and loneliness, all of those things. You compound all of that with just the trauma that they may have been experiencing before COVID. And it's a lot. It's a lot for kids to unpack. It's a lot for our clinicians to try to deal with because the numbers are just higher than ever. Our clinicians are finding in the schools that they have to triage who they can see and what's the biggest need. Our offices have waiting lists because our numbers are up so high for kids calling in with depression. I think earlier this morning we were talking at another meeting, and I mentioned to you that I got a call from a parent whose 16-year-old is struggling with depression and brought it up to her pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, "You need to get this kid into counseling right now." And she called a couple agencies that the pediatrician gave her, and they both had 6-month waiting lists. So she
Hmm.
called and got me, and we have a waiting list as well. But this is a frantic mom who's saying, my kid she's got anxiety, she's fearful about going to school, and now she's talking about suicide. So those are the kinds of things I hear. It's a long answer to your question, I know.
No, but I mean that's what it takes sometimes is a long answer to get to start peeling back the layers, right? So when you know, we do a lot of work in schools. You yourself you was an embedded school therapist inside of different schools in the region here. Why? And of course, not to get controversial, right? But at times we hear some debate on what schools are supposed to be doing for our kids, right? They're only supposed to be teaching academics, and we're on another side of that. Of course, we believe in teaching academics, but we're also on that social emotional side. Why is it why is it hard for a teacher just to teach academics, right? Because there's so much more that comes in the classroom. But describe what that's like from a teacher's point of view, and because you've been in those schools, right? You know what it takes. But why is it not so easy? Why?
Well, I think even educators have come around to knowing that school is much more than academics. Kids don't learn in a vacuum. They bring their emotional well-being or not well-being with them to school, and when they're sitting in a classroom, the teachers have an option of just keeping that tunnel vision of academics, or they can learn the skills to help de-escalate kids, to help soothe kids, to help provide a safe place. Kids can't learn if they don't feel safe. They can't learn if they're emotionally distraught when they come to school. They can't learn if they're anxious. They can't learn if they're depressed, because all of their energy is going into those emotions. It's not going into listening to academics. And so one of the things that our staff has done, and I think I've tried to do over the years, all of us have, is to help educators understand that they have to, if they want to achieve the goal of teaching kids, they have to address the emotional needs of the kids too.
Yeah, because so for kids as well as adults, right, coming into the workplace, and that's one thing I always used to challenge people on when I'd be interviewing. They're like, "Well, I leave my problems at the door. I check my problems at the door," and that's not realistic. It
No.
never works that way because we all have stuff that comes up. So we know adults do that when they come into the workplace, and yes, some are better than others. Some may not have as many stressors going on in their life, so it's easier to leave that at the door. But for kids that are totally still in this realm of learning who they are, learning about their own ups and downs and how to navigate the world, how to navigate peer relationships, they can't leave it at the door, right? They carry it with them.
Well, they can learn to do that, but that's one of the goals, and one of the things that we try to do with them is help them learn the coping skills to be able to put something that's troubling them in a box. It's one of the tools we use. Put it in a box and up on a shelf, and you can pick it up later and deal with it. Just think about your own life, any transition you've had to go through, any stressor you've had to go through. It makes your everyday, day-to-day tasks more difficult if you don't learn those skills about how to deal with that transition, that stress, how to how to cope with whatever's happening by putting it in a box, distracting, thinking of something else. And those are some of the tools we're trying to teach kids. So they can learn to do those things. I don't think it's been emphasized as much more over the years, but COVID has really brought it to light to say, look, we've got to deal with these mental health issues with kids who are coming in depressed or anxious, and we have to give them tools to be able to deal with it so they can learn. I mean, we're not, our goal is not to make school um, a place where kids aren't doing academics. Our goal is to make them be able to do academics and still have those emotional needs met. So it's teaching those skills, which adults can learn too. I mean,
Hmm.
one of the trainings that I do is on stress management for adults, and it's full every year because adults too are looking for, um, what can I do to decrease my stress level? What can I do to be able to get through some of these things? One of the things that, and I know this isn't the question you asked, but I just thought of it,
Hmm.
is when I'm talking to clinicians in the last 2 years about COVID, we've realized this is a parallel process. And by that, I mean they're working with kids on all the mental health issues that go with the COVID pandemic and what they're dealing with while they're dealing with it themselves. And
Mhm.
that makes it a parallel process. And that's tough. In some ways, you can say to kids, truthfully, I can relate to what you're going through. But if you're dealing with your own stress and you're trying to deal with somebody else's stress, it's just an awareness that needs to happen. Everybody has been affected by this pandemic. So we have to be able to learn those own coping skills to be able to teach them.
Yeah, it's the same stressor that the whole world, and that's experienced at the same time. And a lot of times, we talk about sometimes an individual is going through a crisis in their own personal life. Sometimes it's a community going through that together, because of natural disaster. But this was, an issue that affected the entire world. And then, we see this popping up again because we see positive cases over in China, and then factories closing down, and we're seeing, supply chain demand. So it affects it on so many different levels. And then, of course, with our kids, they're going to be struggling just as much. And, with the need outweighs, for us, the need always outweighs the funding, right? And so every year we have principal satisfaction surveys that we do. And you always tell me every year, yeah, the number one complaint is that they want more days of our therapist time. And so, for one, that's why we're doing our first day of giving, our virtual day of giving, this May 3rd to May 4th, 24 hours of giving. And the goal is to raise dollars to put more therapists inside of schools, because that's
Right.
where we see this greatest need is at. So, in the life of during a school year, right? Let's say a therapist is maybe inside one of the schools for one day a week, right? How many kids might they impact? Now, I know it depends on the size of the school, right? But what's on the large end of a caseload that a therapist may end up kind of working with at one point or another?
Um, a therapist who's embedded in a school even one day a week can see up to about 50 kids. That's a lot when you consider there's 7 hours in a day. And kids are seen, the same kids are seen weekly. But once a therapist is in a school, it's very hard to tell somebody, a principal or a parent, no, I can't see this kid. You're there and they're in need. The other problem is, and this is what we see every single day, is that a whole schedule is set. I'm going to see um, these 7 kids or these 10 kids today, and then a big crisis brews. And, one of the kids is out of control, doesn't want to come in the classroom. There's a lot of school phobia in the last couple of years, kids who don't want to come back to school.
Mm-hmm.
They're fearful for one way or another. Or it's another crisis, a fight between 2 kids, or kids just their own trauma from whatever they're experiencing. We have kids who have come to school. Not only are they dealing with the pandemic, of course, but they have community violence. They might have domestic violence in their home, child abuse. Um, our hotline reports just on child abuse and neglect have gone up about 22%
Wow.
in the last 2 years. Um, and I don't know if that's related to COVID. I wouldn't be able to speculate that at this point, but because we have to report these things, I'm watching the increase just go up year after year, and it has to be related to stressors, home stressors, environmental stressors. But so we have lots of things happening in kids' lives, and like I said before, and then a pandemic on top of that. And so a crisis brews, and a school-based therapist just has to jump into action.
Mm-hmm.
And um, they may be giving referrals to our office therapists who then can deal with it on a long-term basis. Unfortunately, they have waiting lists too. The school therapists, though, the one thing they can provide to kids that we can't always do in our offices and outpatient is break down the barriers of stigma. Um, Lots of kids will see their friends getting therapy. They'll see, and they want it too. They see
Mm-hmm.
even adolescents who sometimes balk at having to talk to somebody about their problems or whatever's going on. They'll see better well-being from their friends, sort of hopefulness again, because hopelessness is one of the things we watch for, and they want a part of that too. So they're always really busy. Um, Another thing it breaks down is access. I mean, so many kids don't have access to mental health care, but they can get it in school. And so it's a way for, parents who are busy or parents who don't have transportation to make sure their kids are getting mental health care. Or just the lack of importance some people put on mental health care, kids still have access.
Yeah, because
That's one of the big statistics we found through this COVID pandemic is the kids who are expressing depressive or suicidal ideations, about half of them get mental health care. The other half don't get any treatment.
yeah, and so when you look at that school environment, and yeah, does the school exist because of to reading, writing, arithmetic, right? That's historically that's you sent your kids off to and they'd get educated, but it's morphed into this kind of the overall human being, right? And
Absolutely.
the next, because that's the next every children are always the next level of generation, the next future, right? And no matter what generation it is, it's another like, hey, there's hope for the future type of thing. And so when we invest early in the lives of kids, because because I'm always preaching, right? Mental health touches everything, touches every societal system, and when it comes to employment or unemployment, however you want to look at it, right? When you look at those aspects, when you look at the criminal justice system, when you look at all these different systems, mental health is touching it all. And I think
Absolutely.
that's where people forget sometimes why it's so important.
Well, yeah, and you think about school as a place where kids come and they feel safe. Um, One of the things that we found over the years from research on trauma and different things is that even one significant person in a kid's life, if you know there's lots of trauma going on at home, one significant person in a person's life can really turn the tide in terms of their positive or negative well-being and positive mental health. And a lot of times that person is at school, whether it's a teacher or whether it's a counselor or somebody. So addressing all the needs of kids is really, really important. You can't just address the academics. It's more and more the research shows, and just listening now to teachers and principals and other educators saying, please send more counselors. Please, we can't deal with this all on our own. And it does, I mean, to use an old phrase, it does take a village to raise kids. I mean, we're all involved. This creates healthy communities, not just a healthy kid. It creates a healthy community because, like you said, we're all integrated, we're all entwined, we all
Hmm.
touch each other. So, it's really important that we use all the resources we can so that kids grow up to be healthy and safe.
Switching gears, but not really. Why? What keeps you going in this field? Like what gives you that passion to keep wanting to create change, to look for a brighter future, but to invest your time and your skills into kids? And you work with adults too, right? Don't get me wrong, but like you do have a passion with children.
Yeah, I do. I always have liked working with kids and with families. I think it's that vision of what it could be in a kid's life. And I always say this, it's sort of a social worky thing, and I hope it doesn't come off wrong, but it's sort of like a golf game sometimes. If you ever play golf and you um, are not doing well because that's the way golf is, and you say, I hate this game, I hate this game, I hate this game, and then you have a great shot and you say, I love this game. It's sort of what keeps you going because you see the potential that can happen with any intervention in a kid's life. And they may come back to you years later and say, you really helped me. Or it goes back to that vision where you see a kid have hope again,
Hmm.
where they feel hopeless. Our clinicians and also our staff, working with staff now I'm to the point where most of my work is centered on let's really build a great staff who goes out there into the world. And when they seem excited about what they're doing, and when they talk about the kids in such a way that's not just not just that hope, but it's really moving, it's really touching to listen to them, cry about kids laugh about kids, and feel those successes, in spite of the challenges that go with it. I mean, I think that's what makes us go forward, all of us, keeps us grounded.
And then there's certain days when you hear someone yell four, right? Like in golf. Yeah. So that means look out, right?
Exactly.
It's coming. Yeah. It's almost like every Monday, I think, we hear that. But I mean, it's that excitement because like I think you phrase it like every intervention you do with a kid can be a life altering event. Um,
Yep.
and of course that's with adults as well too. There's moments there, but a lot of those interventions, as I think about that statement, it can be life changing. It could be the finger snap of like a change in somebody to walk down a different road, to make a different choice. And that's so powerful when you think about that because you're so invested in the life of someone else.
And it's really about your presence. Sometimes it isn't even, I know that a lot of times the staff will say, "I'm running out of strategies. I'm running out of techniques," and sometimes it's helping them take a step back and take a breath too, to say your presence in, your relationship building is the thing that's going to really help these kids. That's what they're going to remember, and that's what they're going to hold on to. And so sometimes they have to take us, not that techniques and strategies aren't really important when we're doing intervention, but sometimes it is just sitting with a kid or an adult through their pain or their grief, when nobody else is there to do that. It's a really important thing.
Yeah, and then going back to that concept of when it comes to kids, and that next generation, right? We always now that I'm getting a little bit older, I start thinking about like, well, these kids today, they just seem this way, they seem that way, and I think that's one of the beauties of being a therapist as well. We focus a lot on being objective with people, and it helps centers us as well too. But it's there is a lot more pressures than when, say, we were growing up. It feels like it to me, right? That and a lot of it has to do with social media, technology, but it is a different world than
It
what we
is.
had. Um, and I mean, I have people ask me this a lot, but let me ask you, it's like, do you think social media, the technology, the we're more access to the world? Do you think that's impacting the lives of kids in a greater way, or impacting in a way that's causing more stress and causing more crisis to occur, or is it hard to say for you?
No, I don't think it's hard to say. It's definitely increasing stress, and it's definitely increasing because everything's so immediate. Um, you know, when I was a kid, if there was a group of peers who decided to be mad at me, I wouldn't find out till the next day at school. Now kids find out immediately. They feel left out immediately. They hear about community violence events before anybody has time to process it for them or help explain what's gone on. They hear about other forms of violence or things before anybody has any chance to process it. So in that respect, social media and their access to information will always be a problem because sometimes we need a deep breath and, like I said before, a step back before we can help kids process what's happening. On the other hand, we can't throw any of that out and to say it's all bad. I mean, there are social media sites that kids can pop on immediately and find out what are some tips to do when I'm really depressed. Who can I call when I'm really depressed? That I don't know that were available, you know, um, for us necessarily when we were kids. We didn't really have access to information that would help us navigate a tough world. So I think it can go both ways, but
Mm.
I think that saying it's all social media or it's all is not correct. But I do think that it's something to watch. And mine would be more just the absolute immediacy of information that kids have access to is really hard. It doesn't give us a chance to breathe sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said that because I thought it's kind of like it rips off the band-aid right away. Like it used to be
Yeah.
like, okay, if you're a parent and you're dealing with a crisis situation, about a crisis situation that you need to tell your kids about, maybe a classmate, suffered a major injury or something. You think, okay, how should I phrase this to them? How should I present that to them? And then lo and behold, by the time you get to it, kids already know about it. They know before we do most of the time. So it is different just from that perspective. We can't prep them as much as well.
Right. I remember just, a couple months ago, there was a crisis at one of the high schools where a student had completed suicide. And one of the administrators called and said, "All right, I got to get this information out. Like, what do I do? How do I say it? Because they're going to start hearing it on social media within the next 10 minutes." And, because most of the kids have their phones right there at school. And so I got to get this out. What do we say?
Hmm.
And, just think about that. Where in the past, administrators at schools or parents, like you said, they had time to figure out what's the best way to put this information out. We don't have that time anymore. Even in the span of how much I've been working, we always had time to the overnight before you went in and talked to a group of kids in an assembly or something.
Hmm.
Not anymore. It just doesn't work like that.
Wow. So let me ask you this. Let me start wrapping up and ask you this. If you were going to say the benefit, if you have somebody, let's say you're talking to somebody who's like, yeah, I don't know if you need therapists inside of schools. What would be your pitch to saying why it's important to have a mental health professional inside a school?
Well, the biggest one what I would say, and I don't mean to sound flip about it. I say, well, if you want your kids to learn, then you better figure out how to address their emotional well-being, or they're not going to learn. I say that to teachers all the time because there are teachers, old school teachers, who say, no, 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 can't take this kid out of my class. No, you can't. They're here to learn. And when they're not willing to bend, I'll say, this is you're struggling with a kid. This is why you're struggling. They can't think beyond, whatever trauma they're dealing with at the moment. So let us help you get them to a point where they can learn. If you want to achieve the goal of academic success, and most educators now will tell you that is absolutely true, then give them the 30 minutes they need to process some of this information, and the learning will happen. So that's the most important thing, I think. Beyond that, it's just the well-being of the kid.
Awesome.
You can also address it from, you want to cut down on disruptive behavior, let us help you do that.
Hmm. Yeah, true partnership, right?
Right,
Academics and clinical excellence, so to speak, come together and
right,
creates a very well engaged environment for all the kids in the classroom, right? So,
right.
Saundra Barker, it is always a pleasure. Now, see, and we got along. We didn't bring up, because it's kind of not football season yet, even though it's kind of the hot stove league for football because the Packers don't have any wide receivers anymore. But hey, you're paying your quarterback, plenty of
But they got a
money.
quarterback.
Yeah, you got your quarterback. Yeah, and so that's all
Yeah,
that
that's something
matters.
the Bears don't know about. There is this position in football called quarterback.
We have a new quarterback now. Sure, it's
You
the
always have a new quarterback.
it's like the what is it, like the 52nd quarterback in the last 30 years compared to the two by the Packers. But hey, who's complaining? I like diversity.
Yeah, well, I like diversity too.
Yeah.
So,
All right, Saundra, it was good to see you again. I'll be seeing you at work as well, but I'm glad we're able to
yeah,
do this podcast in prep from
good.
our Day of Giving, which will be May 3rd and May 4th. So if you're interested, go to our website, stlouiscounseling.org. You can see what that Day of Giving is all about there and how to donate. But at the same time, if you're curious about our services, go there, check it out, and then figure out what might be the best match for you. So until next time, this is Tom Duff, and Mental Health Matters.